The security guard had always found the old hospital unsettling, even before the power outages and strange noises began. The place had been abandoned for nearly 20 years, its hallways filled with peeling paint, broken tiles, and the faint smell of rust and mildew. The company had bought the property for redevelopment, but until the paperwork cleared, he was assigned to watch over it at night. The cameras covered every corridor, every ward, every corner of that forgotten place. Most nights were uneventful, just the hum of the monitors and the occasional scurry of rats echoing through the vents. But that night, something felt wrong from the very beginning. The air was heavier, the silence more absolute, as though the building itself was holding its breath. He sat in the control room, surrounded by flickering screens that displayed the hospital's decaying skeleton. The monitors crackled with static every few minutes, as if struggling to hold on to a signal from the other side. Around 2:43 a.m., movement caught his eye on one of the lower screens. In Ward C, where the lights had been dead for years, a faint shape appeared. It was standing at the far end of the corridor, motionless, dressed in what looked like a white hospital gown. His first thought was that a trespasser had broken in, maybe a junkie or thrill-seeker trying to film a ghost video. He reached for the radio, but the signal hissed uselessly in his ear. The building was old, thick with concrete and interference. He decided to check it himself. The air outside the control room was colder than it should have been. His flashlight beam wobbled slightly as he walked, catching glimpses of dust swirling in the air like ash. The hallways twisted and turned, leading deeper into the heart of the hospital. Each door he passed bore faded numbers, some half torn away, others scrawled with graffiti from years of neglect. The silence pressed on him like a weight. He tried to tell himself it was just another shift, just another night. But the sound of his own footsteps seemed to grow louder, echoing unnaturally off the walls. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard a faint dripping sound, rhythmic and hollow, like water falling in an empty sink. He reached Ward C and paused. The sign above the door was cracked, one hinge barely holding on. He pushed the door slowly, and it creaked open with a sound that echoed down the corridor. The beam of his flashlight swept across the room, dust danced in the light, and the floor was littered with broken glass, old syringes, and rusted bed frames. The smell was damp and rotten. He moved between the beds, one by one, peering into the shadows. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone having been there. But when he reached the far wall, he felt it. A sudden chill that crawled up his spine. It was as though something unseen had passed right through him, cold as winter air. He turned sharply, but the room was empty. Uneasy, he backed away and made his way toward the stairs. His radio crackled for a moment, a faint burst of static that almost sounded like a whisper. He froze, listening. There it was again, a faint, distorted sound. It wasn't words, but it carried something inhuman, something that didn't belong in that place. He tried to shake it off and returned to the control room, eager to check the monitors. Maybe the cameras would show what his eyes had missed. The corridor seemed longer now, stretched out like the building itself was twisting to keep him inside. By the time he reached the door to the control room, sweat was running down his neck despite the chill. He sat back in his chair, eyes scanning the monitors. The figure was still there. This time it wasn't standing still. It was walking, slowly, steadily, down the same corridor he had just left. His breath caught in his throat as he watched the pale figure drift past the very rooms he had checked moments ago. It didn't move like a person. Its steps were too smooth, too silent. He leaned closer to the screen, heart pounding. The figure stopped suddenly and turned its head toward the camera. For a long moment, it simply stared. The face was pale and featureless, but somehow he could feel its gaze, cold and knowing, piercing through the lens. He reached for the controls to zoom in, but the screen flickered violently. Static consumed the image, then cleared again. Now the figure was closer, halfway down the corridor. It was impossible. He hadn't seen it move. He blinked, trying to focus. but the lights in the control room dimmed. The air turned heavy, pressing on his chest. The static came back, louder this time, filling the room with a harsh, grating noise. The monitors began to distort, the images bending and twisting as if the entire building was shifting on the screens. Then, in the middle of the chaos, one screen cleared. The figure stood right in front of the camera, just inches away, its face filling the frame. For a second that felt like an eternity, it stared directly into the lens. Then, slowly, impossibly, it smiled. It wasn't a human smile. It was stretched too wide, too deliberate, like a mockery of emotion. The guard stumbled back from the chair, knocking over his coffee cup. The lights flickered again, and the monitors began to shut off one by one, each going black with a sharp click. He grabbed his flashlight and turned toward the door, intending to run, to get out of that cursed building. But when he opened the door, the corridor beyond was completely dark. Not the kind of darkness that comes from the absence of light, but a dense, swallowing void that seemed alive. He took a hesitant step forward, calling out, but his voice vanished into the black. The air was freezing now, his breath visible in faint white puffs. The silence was unbearable. No hum of the lights, no distant drips, nothing. Then, somewhere in that darkness, he heard it again. The faint hum of static, growing louder, closer. It wasn't coming from the control room anymore. It was coming from the corridor. His flashlight flickered once, twice, then died. He stood there, surrounded by the darkness, heart hammering. And then he saw it. Two faint points of light glowing at the far end of the hall, like eyes watching him. They didn't blink. They only stared. The next morning, the day guard arrived to find the building empty. The night logs were incomplete, the security feed corrupted beyond recovery. The monitors showed only static, except for one frame that had somehow survived. It showed the control room, empty, but for the chair, turned toward the door as though someone had just stood up, and on the screen behind it, frozen in place, was a faint reflection of a figure in white, smiling into the lens. The company shut the site down after that, citing safety issues and electrical faults. But those who've walked past the old hospital at night swear they can still see a pale light flickering through the control room window. And sometimes, if you listen closely enough, the faint hiss of static in the wind.